Welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker, and I'd like to discuss our North of the 60 bookmark today in our Crusader Kings 3 After the End lore video series. So this is going to talk mostly about the social history of the people living north of the 60, but I think because of the way that the world operates up here, we're also going to have to talk a little bit about the Earth itself, just to paint a little picture for you. So for those of you who've never played CK3 After the End, this is a total conversion mod that brings the new world into the technological world of Crusader Kings 3 via means of an apocalypse. So in the event that there was an apocalypse and industrial society were to collapse, then probably what we would see would be something like this, right? Without the resources necessary via motorization and mechanization and industrialization, it becomes a lot harder to control territory in extreme places. And so that's why you see even in the modern era that if you want to resist an enemy occupier, you go to like hills, you go to mountains. If there's jungle around, you go to a jungle, or you go north of the 60. You go into the tundra and the taiga. And so that's what this world here is this is an area that is an extreme area that probably has been independent because of the nature of the terrain here, from the vestiges of whatever industrial society was left after the event. It may have all disappeared all at once, it may have disappeared gradually, but it almost certainly disappeared in this extreme world a lot earlier than it disappeared in like Washington, D.C., for instance, right? Because this is the place where indigenous people live today. So I'd like to just briefly go over the land here itself, north of the 60. There's a lot of really beautiful things about it. This bookmark is really about this map mode more than this map mode. This map mode is interesting, and we will discuss the cultures and religions in due time, but this is really about the terrain, because the terrain itself tells you the story, because this is land held in permafrost, right? This is land where you cannot conduct agriculture. This is land where you cannot have enough excess supply to have people who do not produce in your societies, right? This is territory where some of this ocean is going to be frozen, either part of or the entirety of the year. This is land where during the summer the sun never goes away. This is land where they've made a movie, Insomnia, starring Al Pacino and Robin Williams, where the land itself drives people insane. And that's something that's true here in Crusader Kings 3 After the End. It's also something that's true around the world, right? This isn't even just not having access to steam trawlers. This is the way society functions in a lot of these places even today, right? People overlook that just because there isn't an independent nation here on the map in the extreme north of Canada, they assume that life there is the same as it is in Ontario. It's not. The technologies that you need to survive in the Northwest Territories are very different from the technologies that you need to survive in Michigan. And that's sort of what's captured here in the cultures and religions of the North of the 60 bookmark. But this is the Haida culture, air quotes, Vikings of the Northwest Pacific. But they have some of the social technologies that would allow people to thrive in a post-industrial world. They have a society where giving away wealth and food to others is a cultural norm. It's celebrated. It de-economizes relationships in a way that's very dangerous if you're trying to levy taxes on consumption. But it's very powerful if you're trying to create personal relationships between people and therefore create the sort of things that give birth to a tribal society. And a tribal society, I think, is going to be also advantageous in this climate, because a tribal society is going to decentralize power. They're also notorious seafarers, practiced pirates, and that means that they are not going to be reliant upon their own resources. They're going to be reliant upon the resources of the people near them. And that's something that's going to allow you to survive north of the 60, because sometimes the resources that you have simply aren't enough, and it becomes incumbent upon you, in order to survive, to take the resources that you need from other cultures near you. And that's what this Haida culture says, right? It says we take things from everybody else and then give it all to each other. It's a good way to survive in a post-apocalypse, right? Not every society that is communal needs to be xenophilic. Other technologies that are going to be pretty ubiquitous in this environment, both in real life and in Crusader Kings 3 After the End, dog breeding is going to be absolutely critical in this environment, because you can't have horses here, right? And you can't walk through all of this snow, you'll die. And so you need dog sleds. That's how you have to move around, even in a modern society, that, or, like motorized sleds if you're really fancy. But you need specialized technology in order to have transportation here, because not only do you have the issues of you can't have horses, they'll freeze to death, but you also have the issue that you might not be able to have ports because the ocean might be frozen. And that's something that also is just kind of crazy when you think about it. And hunting, of course, and nomadic pastoralism are both going to be incredibly important in this space, even amongst non-indigenous peoples like the Newfie culture here, which is Atlantic Canadian heritage in Newfoundland. They themselves are also going to have the same sort of social technologies that allow the Haida people to survive on the West Coast, where perhaps their land isn't as frozen as the areas that the Inuit occupy. They don't have enough territory that's arable year-round to actually support society through agriculture, and so they have dexterous fishermen and practiced pirates, right? The people who are going to survive north of the 60 are going to be a combination of the people who adapt to this post-industrial world and the people who are literally already living there in that post-industrial world right now. And that's sort of what you see in the cultural map mode. In the faiths map mode, we see something similar and different. And so in the faiths map mode, we see that indigenous faiths are now predominant in a lot of these territories, just as indigenous peoples are predominant there, both in Crusader Kings 3 and in real life. If you look at a distribution of where indigenous people live in colonized territories now, there's a lot of indigenous people living north of the 60, because you need cultural adaptations to live there, even in the modern world. But the faiths that are here are not exclusively indigenous. And this is understandable to a pretty good degree, right? Because this is not just the religion of anyone in particular. This is a Russian Orthodox tradition, right? The Russian people themselves are adapted socially to surviving in extreme conditions now, because they live in extreme conditions now. And so that's kind of what you're seeing in the Tabarism being on the map. And of course, Tabarism also shows syncretic Amerindian spirituality. The other non-indigenous faith to be represented here north of the 60 in any meaningful capacity is going to be this Grove of the Foggy Days. This is going to be sort of a fantastic faith in a sense. You can read over the stories that they tell here, but this is referencing some fantasy tropes are showing up here in the Grove of the Foggy Days, but not in a way that's, I think, necessarily memey. Keep in mind that a lot of folklore, and for that matter, a lot of religion, is itself kind of fantastical, right? Most religions rely upon the concept of miracles to communicate power. And so the Grove of Foggy Days, I don't think, is necessarily unrealistic. I think fantastical elements in religion are in fact pretty realistic. And this one isn't just a fantastical religion, it's a fantastical religion that relies upon whale hunts, which means that it actually has some overlap with the faiths of the indigenous peoples who are also surviving here in this extreme environment. And then of course we have the indigenous faiths, which are very diverse, and I'd love to go into all of them, but I don't want this video to be 30 minutes long. So we'll talk about the Ilisajut. The Ilisajut, this is the Inuktitut word for lesson, but this is an attempt by the mod to represent that, of course, globalization has occurred in this world, right? Just because this area is itself hostile to colonization doesn't mean that the religions of the people who have survived in this bookmark have gone entirely unaltered by colonization. And so there's Christian syncretism here. There's syncretic Amerindian spirituality here. And of course we have the midnight sun. So this is a trail walker faith. But this is a trail walker faith that's going to emphasize the unique properties of living in this area. When you live north of the 60, you do have unending daylight. You do have unending nighttime, depending on whether or not you are in winter or in summer. And so this is going to be not necessarily an indigenous faith, but a folkloric faith. And a folkloric faith that's going to highlight the things that are going to be ready and available, right? It's much easier to do astrology when there's no big cities around. But it's also much easier to do astrology when there's 20 hours of darkness. And that's something that you can experience up here. So again, I don't want to go through absolutely every single faith and religion here in Crusader Kings 3 north of the 60. I just wanted to give you a macro idea of what this bookmark is going to look like. This bookmark is going to look like what it looked like when people were searching for the Northwest Passage. It's going to be a hostile and inhospitable world. It's going to be a world of tundra and taiga. It's going to be a world of low supply limit. It's going to be a world where you might have extremely low development because there's not going to be a lot of urbanization that's going to survive the apocalypse because there isn't a lot of urbanization in some of these places even now. All right, that's Walker. That's Crusader Kings 3 north of the 60. Take care.